Hey everyone, I know it's been a while, but we're back with another video about Ragnarok Mobile. Today we're going to talk about Element 101, or the fundamentals of elemental damage in Ragnarok. This is part 1 because this will not include extensive details about PvP reduction. If I do get time in the future, I'll get down to discussing PvP adjustment rather for elemental damage. Before we start, I'd like to thank Team Leaks for working diligently in terms of data mining, translation, and extracting whatever new data we have for the upcoming patches. Likewise, I'd also want to give credit to the creator of From Handbook, which is Tokwan from our Discord server. I did use a couple of the images he has on his site, so thanks a lot, bro. That made everything a lot easier. Okay, so now we're gonna dive into the discussion. I'll try to make this real quick, so um, I'll just get on to it. So before we go into the details, I just like to set expectations. We will not be talking about the basic element versus element chart. So in the game, it's identified as gameconfig.elementRestrain. We won't be talking about that because the game already has extensive explanation on how the element table works. So as you can see here, this is where you can see the element coefficient within the game. So we're not going to talk about that because it's repetitive. I'm pretty sure you're already well versed around that. Okay, so we're gonna talk about the definition, like what's the element factor in Ragnarok? What are the different sources? Um, where can we get certain values to strengthen either your element reduction or your element attack? We're gonna talk in depth about how the formula looks like, and I'll try to explain each line within the formula, and then also its application. How does it eventually work out, and what are the key takeaways to be considered? Okay. Uh, one thing one thing to note in ROM, element computation is different for physical and magical. Um, the game doesn't explicitly tell you that, but there's a key difference. Actually, there's a big difference between those two things. So up on top here, you see a snippet of how it looks like from the physical attack perspective. So element param and element param 2 are the two factors that governs element. As you can see, it comes right after body param, which is right before adding in the base attack again. If you don't know what base attack and all these other things are, I have other videos. You just look at the list of my videos on my channel where I explain these other parameters. For magic, it is the cult magic element parameter, as well as element param 2 that governs it. And as you can see, it's much later in the formula, which is actually just right after the magic damage increase. And so, because of that, there are certain raw sources, such as a base magic attack, magic refine, that it also multiplies. And so that's really the key difference between two of them, right? I mean, there are other differences, but I'd say those are the biggest differences. I mean, one of the biggest differences. So in a nutshell, Element has a bigger weight for magic attacks because it also multiplies base magic attack and magic refine. Of course, I'm not gonna say that um, it's useless in physical attacks. I think it's too far fetched. It still has its use, but if you just lay it side by side, compare it apple to apple, Element plays a bigger role for magic attacks. Also, some aspects of elemental damage is not factored in for magic attacks. So we're going to talk about that in a bit. Okay, so for physical attacks, element is governed by element param and element param 2. So element param is made of with these two parameters. So it's basically 1 plus element increase multiplied by element rate. Element rate is your element versus element ratio, the one that we talked about earlier at the start of the video. Element param 2 is equals to 1 plus element attack minus element reduction. So below here, you have just sample sources. Okay, there's a lot out there, but these are just samples so that you can easily visualize. So element rate is the element table. Element ink is basically Vadin card. Element attack is Kaho card. And then element reduction is Jack card. For magic, okay, this another one of the key differences. Magic is governed by magic element and element param 2. So magic element is straight up just your element versus element ratio. Okay, element param 2 is 1 plus element attack minus element reduction. So if you verbalize what these cards actually say is, if I remember correctly, Vadin card says plus damage to fire monsters, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and then Kaho is plus fire damage, and then Jack is minus fire damage or less damage from fire. So basically, that's what it says on the cards. I mean, I'd really say don't rely too much on it. ROM is very notorious for mistranslating something and loosely interchanging the terminologies they use. But yeah, so in general, for physical, cards like Vadin will work. For magic, it will not work. Okay, as far as the sources go, element increase or element ink. These are some of the sources. I mean, these are just some examples. There are a lot more. I can't go through all of them. I think if you want to figure out if a certain if a certain card or equip would affect a certain parameter, you'd probably would want to go to ROM handbook and then check it out there. The codes and the parameters are actually displayed there, so I think it's a very helpful resource for you guys. One thing I'd like you all to focus on is when it comes to element rate. The element rate, again, is the element table. It's the element coefficient. So far, these are the ones that you can acquire that affects it. So this is from your headgear gacha, and this is something that only rich people can dream of. So this is an ancient relic, Lord of Vain, which increases your element coefficient. So these are so far the two things. We're gonna go through the formula later. I may be wrong, but so far, if I can remember, these are two things that increases it by a certain percentage. Okay, now let's go to element rate again. Going back, the element rate is part of element param and magic element. So for the element rate, this is how the formula looks like. May look a little daunting, but if you dissect it, actually looks pretty easy. If you have some coding background, this is a function, right? So this is a function. These are all of the inputs it will take, and then eventually this is what it will return. And then there are a lot of logical lines. So the first part is it's collecting the variables. So it's basically collecting your attributes and some of the variables it will use for the calculation. Source attack element is you, the player. Target def element is basically your target or your enemy. All the others here would basically pick it from other parts of the game. Second part is error loggers. So don't ask me why it's there. Don't ask me what they use it for. I have no idea. But basically what this is doing is if it runs into an error, such as if the source attack element has no value, which shouldn't happen because every attack element should have a value, it basically logs that as an error. And then it returns 0. If the target def element is also 0, it has no value rather than 0, then it also logs it. So it basically just logs all of the error situations. Could be for post-mortem use so that the devs can go in and fix it, but I don't know. I don't know what they use it for. And then you have an entry here for one of your Essirs. So if you look up here, it's collecting these Essir points, get rune point, and then these two values. So this basically, and I can't remember which job it is, but this basically the Essir that lessens the poison damage taken. Next up is from the advanced runes. So this is the advanced runes that increases holy damage to shadow. So if your attack element is holy and your target element is shadow, basically increases the element the element factor. Um, Again, it's an advanced rune. I don't have it memorized which job this is for. And then this is the gotcha headgear. So again, this is what increases your element coefficient. It increases it by 10%. If you look at the line here, it basically says if you have this equipped or if you have the buff from this headgear and your element rate is greater than 1, which means the element you're using needs to have a bonus against the element of your enemy, then it will multiply it by 1.1, which effectively giving you 10% more. Next line is the Divine Hymn Carver. So I didn't mention it earlier, sorry I forgot, but basically if your target, okay, if you see your target user has buff ID 49130, so if your target has this ancient relic, then the element coefficient will always be 1 or less. It can't go beyond that. It can't go higher than that. So which basically means if my armor is earth element and you're using fire element for your attack, but I have this relic, it means you basically won't get any bonus damage from your fire coefficient. It gets stuck at 1. And then lastly, you have a Lord of Fame, which increases the element coefficient by 15%. So there's the element rate, which is being used by both physical and magical attacks. Okay, next up we have element param. So this is a formula for element param. Let me go through it line by line. So the first portion, it declares those variables as 0 and then collects whatever the source attack element is and the target def element is. Okay, then further down below, it tries to identify the element ink value and element reduction value. What you okay for coding? Okay, this is a little bit of coding knowledge. So if you look closely here, this is a function, and the function basically takes in a dictionary that it subsets. So basically subset the nature props dictionary with these indices. So whatever the target def element value is, which is represented in the game as integers, it subsets it, and then that entry in the dictionary also has values embedded in it, and it basically takes in the first index out of it. Okay, don't mind that. It's just how the game picks the value. Same thing for the element reduction part. And then right here in the middle, again, you have your error loggers. And then this is where the multiplication happens. So calc element param basically returns this value, which is 1 plus element ink, which you basically get from here, this first portion here, multiplied by common function calc element rate, which is the previous one. So the result of element rate gets used in element param. Okay, so it gets multiplied by 1 plus element ink. Again, element ink being Vadon card. Element param 2 is a little bit longer, and if you notice, there are certain elements here that aren't in the other formula, which we'll likely talk about that. So again, we start off with collecting the variables, and then the error loggers, and then there are some hard-coded adjustments for certain skills. So this first one here is for Asura Strike and Sky-Breaking Dragon Fist, which basically alters your the element reduction. So you see this part here? So it basically says element reduction is equals max element reduction minus 0.06 multiplied by the skill level minus 5 or 0. So basically whichever is higher. Next portion is the hard-coded adjustment for Arm Cannon and Flame Dragon Blast. And then you have your PvP adjustment. So again, I'm not going to talk about this here in part 1, but inside PvP, there are some adjustments. One is you have 20% in your PvP reduce values, which you don't have in PvE. The other one is there's a limiter. So the result of element reduction minus element attack, there's a limit. And then there's basically an adjustment. So I don't know what words to use to describe it, but it basically doesn't make the graph linear. So if you graph out your damage and you put in the PvP reduction, it won't be linear. Okay, but enough of that. We're gonna talk about that when we go into the PvP portion. And then lastly, there is a floor value. The floor value basically means whatever the result of this element param 2 is, it can't go lower than 10%. So a lot of parameters have floor or ceiling values. So that's what the game uses to ensure that no one can actually reach a reduction that would make the entire damage equals to 0. Okay, lastly, we talk about the magic element function. So again, this is only being used by when it comes to magic attacks. So first off, you collect the variables, and then you have spiritual vision, which basically hard sets your target's death element to 8, which is ghost. And then it basically captures the error conditions. Okay, it just makes sure that the game doesn't crash or maybe the function doesn't return an error. And so basically if there's any error situations, it returns the value as 0 rather than, maybe crashing the game or, bringing up an error situation. And then you have, again, the homestead of Snowy Owl, which is your headgear gacha. You have Divine Hymn Carver, and you have Lord of Fame. So again, those are the the formulas. If you go back, let me go back here. So if you go back within physical attacks, it's the element param and element param 2. Okay, in magic attacks, it's magic element and element param 2. So the only difference is this one. This guy here doesn't get considered when it comes to magic attacks. Okay, but then, we have all of these things. How is this useful? I mean, it's a bunch of things, but how does that apply into game? So I did a very high level testing, nothing very specific, just to oversimplify it and just to show it. Okay, this is me doing some damage testing with some of my friends. To make it really easy, there are no buffs in here. No one did buff anything, no food, no whatever. It's just that for the SBX here, he had to use Ancient Poison so that his attacks would be poison. So as you can see here, without the Argope card and with Argope card, the difference in the damage is about 21.2%. For magic, so this is a ninja. Don't mind the 8 million here, that's damage to the pet. So without Pasana, the damage I got was about 460k. With Pasana, it got reduced to 123. Roughly about 73% reduction in damage. Okay, this is not exact. Okay, you probably won't get the exact values when you try to do a comparison, but this just gives you the difference of how they actually play out. Obviously, one player is stronger than the other, but in general, you would feel like there is a difference when the elemental coefficients comes into play for magic and physical. That's why in PvP, I know Argyope is a big help when you're up against SPX, but at the end of the day, they still are able to kill you most of the time. When it comes to magic, yeah, they can still kill you, but they do end up having a much tougher time when you're wearing the counter for whatever attack element they have. Uh, Thanks for Dodong and thanks for Kyle for the damage testing. So key takeaways that I'd like y'all to have after this video, because obviously if there's no takeaway, there's no insight that comes out of this video, then this is just time wasted. So key takeaway is the element carries a bigger weight for magic. Okay, this is a fact. For whatever setup you have, if you're physical, obviously the element may also play a big factor. But just mathematically looking at the formula, uh, it carries a bigger weight for magic. It's not to say that it's useless in physical, but factually, it just carries a bigger weight for magic. It goes for both offense and defense. Okay. The challenge though with element is you need to know what your enemies will be dishing out, right? I mean, probably if you're up 1v1, you know your enemy well, you can easily counter their element. But if you're up against a big group or maybe for war, it's all sorts of elements, and that becomes a lot more difficult to counter. Actually, that's one of the reasons why, if you notice, when they introduced the ancient equipments, elements were grouped into two groups basically: fire, water, earth, wind. They get their own reduction, and then ghost, um, shadow, all those irregular elements, those other four irregular elements, also have their own sets of reductions. And so that's just so you are not so um, verticalized in a certain element. It gives you a little bit of flexibility. That's because it's really difficult to use the element as a hard counter against a large group. 1v1, no issues. Um, Next point, defensively, countering the attack element of your enemy is the most efficient way to improve your survivability. Yes, we can argue, I can put in damage reduction stuff or whatever, but when it comes to armor slots, it's probably the single most useful tool for survivability. Because of the sheer amount of reduction it ends up giving you. To a certain extent, this extends to physical, but it's more obvious for magic attacks. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's up to you how you build your character. I'm not an expert when it comes to making builds, but if you look at the formula and if you look at the weights that each of these multipliers are carrying, then I think you'd get more out of just straightly countering their element. Okay, that's it. So again, sorry if it extended too long, but that's overall the key takeaway here. So element bigger in magic versus physical. Okay, so if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm sorry I'm not so good at managing my YouTube channel, so I can't always reply to comments in YouTube. If you do ping me on Facebook, because I'm on Facebook now, I will make it a point to reply to you. I'm also active in Discord. Okay, maybe not so active anymore, but I still check my messages and I still check the channels there from time to time. and I do help out whenever I can. So yeah, hit me up, and whatever next topics you want to hear about, just let me know in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.